Hey everyone, so today's video is a little bit different because once again, this doesn't sound very different so far, does it? Once again, I found a really interesting post on Reddit that I want to talk about. So this post is sharing apparently the hardest university entrance exam questions in, some people say the world, almost definitely in the country, in the UK, and I just think it's absolutely fascinating. So, these are all past exam questions for All Souls College at Oxford Uni. Don't know why that's so hard for me to say, All Souls College. It's a bit of a mouthful. And each year, apparently around 80 people take this exam and only 2 of them actually get accepted for either like a postgrad course or funding or whatever. These are kind of like really, really intense exams. From what I could tell, you have to take 4 different papers at least, although rules may have changed over the years, and I found it really hard to find completely up-to-date information. There are some general exam papers you have to take, there are some subject-specific ones you have to take. You also have to submit like examples of your writing and so on like that. So it's a big thing, but today we're just going to be looking at a few of these exam papers because they're questions that are designed to help kind of understand how you think rather than necessarily like testing specific knowledge. But at the same time, you do have to have knowledge and a wide range of knowledge in order to actually be able to answer these at all. And in that sense, I think it's really, really interesting to look at. In today's video, I just want to take a look at a couple of the kind of example questions and then go through kind of like a few potential answers and the points that you could discuss. And we're not going to be going super in depth with these, so I'm not going to be doing kind of like a full in-depth answer and analysis and coming to any of my own conclusions, but I am going to be kind of like discussing potential discussion points you could raise around these questions, if that makes sense. You'll understand once we get into the video itself. However, if there are any questions that you're particularly interested in or any of the things I discuss, including any of the things I'm discussing in this video and any of the questions you see that I haven't discussed yet, and you'd like me to do a full in-depth video essay on it, please let me know down in the comments and we'll see what we can do, eh, Coobs? There you go, she made her promise. But you're writing the scripts, okay? Deal? Keys on it? Thank you very much. Before we discuss the actual questions specifically, I do want to preface this by saying that I found the actual Reddit thread that these were in very, very interesting in its own right. People's response to seeing these fell into 2 very, very distinct categories. The first group being the people like me who were like, oh my god, these are so interesting and inspiring. And then the other very distinct group of people were like, oh, this is a stupid waste of time, what's the point? And it really kind of highlighted to me how different people are. And okay, that sounds really silly and overly simplistic, but think about it, like people process information in completely different ways. We learn in completely different ways. We see merit in completely different things. We work in completely different ways. And looking at something like this and people's response to it's really highlighted that to me. How, you know, someone can see these things as a test of knowledge and think they're super interesting and inspiring, whereas other people just don't see any benefit from it. Maybe they're the people who place more value on practical skills or, you know, actual sort of working knowledge rather than more theoretical questions, if that makes sense. And it's really, really interesting. There's absolutely no right or wrong. There's no one that's better than the other. Just like there's no one right or wrong response to these questions. There's no right or wrong way to think if they're good or not. Does that make sense? It's just very, very interesting to see the kind of distinctions between people and how they think and what they place value in, and I found it fascinating. So let's take a look at some of these thoughtful and thought-provoking and honestly quite difficult questions, but first a very quick word about the fantastic sponsor of today's video. This video was made possible thanks to Atlas VPN, who are currently offering my viewers a ridiculously good discount of a 3-year subscription for just $1.39 a month, which is insanely good value. You also have a 30-day money-back guarantee if you're not completely satisfied, making it the absolutely most affordable online protection out there. And if you want to check it out for yourself, there is a link down in my video description. A good VPN is so important just for both online security and honestly convenience and ease of use on the internet. You can use it to alter the appearance of your location online and still get high speeds, which means if I'm off traveling the world somewhere, I can still access my UK Netflix from back home, which means I don't have to stop binge watching shows like Brooklyn Nine-Nine for the 3 millionth time. Seriously, I finished the series and I just go back and start it all over again. I am obsessed. The absolute biggest appeal for me though is online security. Atlas VPN can be used to hide your IP address, protect you while you're using public Wi-Fi, and it'll block malicious links and ads and trackers and notify you of any data breaches, which is particularly important to me because pretty much my entire job and livelihood is based online. So having really, really good online security is essential for me. So if you'd like to try a VPN for yourself, I thoroughly, thoroughly recommend Atlas, and it is absolutely worth giving it a try, like I say, because you have this 30-day money-back guarantee if you're not completely satisfied. And right now, if you want to check out the link that's both in my video description and as a pinned comment here, you'll get the insanely good deal of a 3-year subscription to Atlas VPN for just $1.39 a month. It is absolutely worth it. It is fantastic value, and I am so, so grateful to Atlas for sponsoring this video. You'll be helping support me, my channel, my work, and also getting an insanely good deal in the process. So thank you so, so much to Atlas VPN. Now let's jump back into the video content itself. So the general papers which we're going to be looking at today and focusing on really do cover a mixed bunch of topics. There is such a range here. There are plenty where I just wouldn't have a clue where to start and how to answer. Others which I could probably make a few basic points for, and then others which I already have enough ideas about to write an easy 10,000 words and, you know, forget what else I'm supposed to be doing with my day. I'm not entirely sure how many of these questions you're meant to answer in the exam or how many words are expected. I'm not sure if it's like a pick 5 and write 500 words on each, or more of a pick 1 and give me 4,000 words. Do you know what I mean? But that's not really the point of this video. We're not looking at the exam itself. We're not interested in how to pass the exam. I'm just interested in these questions and how inspiring and thought-provoking they are, and kind of want to talk about them as discussion points for a fun video. So I think my favorite question that I found on here, and one that I genuinely think I would like to make a video or series of videos on, is the one that just simply asks, write the history of a colour. My God, I read that and suddenly my brain was firing in all different directions. I was like, I have so many ideas. I got very, very excited. So it's so open-ended. There is so much you can do with it. For a start, how do you actually want to write an answer to this? Do you want to make it a simple, straightforward academic essay, or do you want to get creative with it? You could write a narrative in which you personify the colour as almost as though you're writing the colour's biography, or the fun thing that I think could be good is write it in an autobiographical style as though you are the colour recounting your own history. Admit it, that would be amazing, right? Yes, when Van Gogh moved away from muddy dark greens and browns, he discovered me, vibrant, bold yellow. Whether this was simply an aesthetic choice or a natural consequence of mental or optical health problems, we can't say for sure, but the fact remains I became a star. He began a fan of simple yellow ochre, and then soon, all the shades, cadmium, chrome, lemon, golden yellows, all had their place in his paintings. I had a place. Okay, maybe I got a little bit too invested in that. But it would be so good, wouldn't it? Write a whole essay from the perspective of a colour. You are the colour in all your different shades. Oh, I love it. Anyway, and then there's the actual content of what you can talk about. Colour is such a broad subject, and there's so many different directions you could take that in depending on your field of expertise or your area of interest, or in my case, whatever obsession I seem to have this week. So perhaps the most obvious idea or example is to go down the art history route and discuss the use of a particular colour in painting, sculpture, or art over the years. You could even extend this to media like photography or film, or even fashion if that's where your interest lies. You could discuss how the original pigments were found and made naturally, and then the more recent creation of synthetic pigments and how that affected the art world, and also supply and demand and everything like that. You can discuss how some pigments aren't used anymore and are incredibly difficult to replicate. For example, mummy brown, which has a fascinating history in that it was literally made from crushed up mummies, giving it both a completely unique colour and texture. And is also kind of, potentially unethical. So a lot of natural pigments were made creating either rare materials or odd materials, and so the ethics around using them is a little ambiguous, shall we say. Mummy brown is one which is a little questionable. Another one being cadmium red. Hello, editing me here. I just completely misspoke in this section. I kept saying cadmium red instead of carmine red, or carmine red, however you want to say it. But I just wanted to correct it because sometimes I put these things on screen, people don't always see, or people are only just listening, and I just wanted to make sure it's as clear as possible. So, my bad, sorry. The natural pigment is not the synthetic one that's so widely used now. It's quite easily synthesized today and is very, very similar to the original cadmium red pigment, but the original one was made by crushing up bugs. So then we're left asking questions like, is there ever actually any benefit to using the natural pigment over the synthetic one? You know, maybe there's a difference in texture or pigment or longevity or colour or anything like that. We also need to ask, is it ever okay to kill in the name of art? And if so, to what extent? Where do you draw the line? Is it okay to kill plants, to kill fungi, to kill non-sentient animals, to kill all animals? How about humans? Does it matter if the thing that you're using in your art was already dead, like in the case of mummies? How do you decide what is okay and what isn't in the realm of art and aesthetics and self-expression? And then, of course, you could look at the social implications of certain colours. One example being purple. Looking at the history of purple will tell us a hell of a lot about class divides over the years. Purple used to be super, super rare because the pigment, I think, came from, I want to say, the mucus of a certain type of snail, and it was really, really hard to get, and that made it incredibly expensive. Because of this, for a long time, only the richest people could afford to wear purple. That's why you see a lot of royalty painted wearing purple. At certain points in history as well, it became illegal for anyone other than royalty to wear purple as well. So, you know, it wasn't just a if you have money or not thing, it was a this is the law kind of thing. It was quite literally a status symbol. Some people who wore purple who weren't royalty were literally arrested for treason. This wasn't just like a casual, oh, don't ride a cow on a Sunday type of silly law. This, you know, was followed through. But then over time, a synthetic pigment was created and laws changed, and now we have a very, very different relationship with the colour. So we could look at the history of purple to tell us a lot about social divides and class and our history as a society and stuff like that. If you want to go down a different route entirely, you could approach it more scientifically. So for example, you could talk about animals and colour. So it could be animals of a certain colour in nature and what that means. For example, blue on a dart frog means it's poisonous and you should stay away from it. However, blue for bowerbirds is a message of seduction. Bowerbirds are really, really cool actually, because the males build these really intricate nests for females as a way to like woo them. I love the word woo. Woo. Sorry. I don't know why. I'm really like excited and hyper today. I'm feeling good about this video. I don't know why. These things inspire me. I promise I'm not drunk. I'm just very giggly. Yeah, so bowerbirds build these intricate nests to seduce the females of their species, and then they do a little dance outside the nests and everything, and it's a whole thing. And if the female bird is impressed enough, she will hop into the bowerbird's nest and mate with him and have babas, and her little babies will be born and hatch and stuff in that nest. But it's not just an intricate nest design that's important, it has to look pretty as well. And bowerbirds traditionally use blue items to decorate their nests, hence why blue means seduction. Originally they would have gone out and picked up like, you know, blue petals and flowers and stuff and decorated their nest with that. Nowadays they've got creative and they pick up anything blue they can find. So you will literally see bowerbirds picking up bits of blue plastic and blue paper and litter and stuff and decorating their nests with it. On the one hand, it's kind of sad to see because, you know, the environmental implications of littering, but at the same time it's really cool to see an animal adapting to its environment and making use of it and being like, well, yeah, this is a crappy thing, but I'm gonna do something cool with it. It's kind of nice to see, you know? Similarly, if you want to go down the science route, you might want to talk about physics and what it means to be able to see certain colours of light and how things have been discovered and used and all sorts of stuff like that. You might want to talk about tech, making use of certain colours or what they use to signify or things like that. Again, not really my area of expertise, but it's something to maybe think about if that was something that you're interested in. Or an idea that I might personally like to go with because I'm so interested in like books and literature and poetry is look at the use of a colour throughout literature, for example. You could talk about its uses and symbolism and give a number of examples. So red would be a great one to do for this. You could start with early fairy tales and talk about things like Little Red Cap and the red shoes and what red was supposed to symbolise and mean in those and its use. Then go on to talk about, I don't know, something like novels like The Scarlet Letter and the use of red in that. You could talk about red in poems like, okay, it's Burns Night tomorrow, so Robert Burns has like poems about red roses and what that means and everything like that. I think, is it Oscar Wilde in The Nightingale talks about different colours of roses and you have a red one in that and so on, and the meanings of all those. You could, let me get one more example. You could talk about the opening sequence of Jane Eyre and how it's set in the Red Room and, you know, talk about kind of Gothic literature in general and settings and the importance of, you know, using physical locations to set up a mood for a story. Boom, there's one for you. Basically, the point is there's a lot you could do with this, or you could try and take a multidisciplinary approach and cover a whole bunch of these things. So, you know, if you take my favourite colour, yellow, you could cover books like, or short stories even, like Charlotte Perkins Gilmore's The Yellow Wallpaper, and talk about mental health there. And then you could also cover yellow in art and talk about Van Gogh and his mental health issues. Like, yellow would be a good one to link to mental health if you wanted an overarching theme. Oh my god, okay, this has nothing to do with anything, but there were certain pigments that were used in Victorian England which were thought to have arsenic in them and other kinds of poisons. So basically these were used in paints and wallpapers, and they were just slowly killing people from inside their homes. That's another kind of approach you could take to this if you're interested. Yes. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting off topic. My brain's jumping around everywhere. This is such a wide topic. It's so inspiring. I think it's absolutely fascinating. Tell me, how would you write about the history of a colour? Which colour would you choose? What approach would you take? What would you do with it? Let me know down in the comments. I think it's an interesting one. I have lots of half-formed thoughts that would be really, really interesting. Oh my god, music! I haven't even thought you could talk so much about music. Colour in music is like a massive... Sorry, I just saw the album In Blue in front of me, the Static Jacks. Amazing album, I love it. And it reminded me. Talk about colour in album artworks, in the references to music and lyrics. You know, oh my god, there's so much you could do. God, yeah, music's a huge topic that I hadn't even started to consider. See, there's so much you can cover. It's a great question. Anyway, I spent too long on that one. There are tons more intriguing ones. Let's look at one of them. Here's another one that absolutely fascinated me. Did punctuation improve prose? Like that. That was a good question, right? There's so much you can talk about there. It seems obvious on the surface. You'd be like, well, yeah, of course it did. But start to scratch away at it. Start to peel back those layers. There is so much you can talk about in this. Amazing. So, let's think about it. The history of different languages and punctuation, how punctuation is used, how placement can change meaning, where punctuation originated from. And just because this question is mostly asking about prose, that doesn't mean you can't talk about punctuation in poetry, for example, and in everyday speech, and all sorts of other purposes. So, for example, you could compare the use, or sometimes lack of use, of punctuation in poetry to its use in prose, and talk about the pros and cons of each. I say prose a lot, but prose and prose are, you know. You could use examples from work that either uses a lot of punctuation, like, for example, maybe like Dickens. He was quite punctuation heavy, wasn't he? And then compare it to other examples where barely any punctuation's been used. So, for example, we spoke about Eunoia by Christian Bock in another one of my videos. That doesn't use a lot of punctuation, I don't think. Another example would be the last chapter of Ulysses by James Joyce. No punctuation in that, pretty much. Maybe you could look at that and talk about the use and what that means and how it affects the writing and what we get out of it. I mean, we also have to think about, like, what exactly does it mean to make prose better? That was the question, right? Yeah, did punctuation improve prose? What does improve mean in this context? Does it mean that your writing is more accessible and easier to understand? Does it mean that your writing conveys its intended meaning more effectively? Does it just mean that the writing is more fit for purpose? What does it mean to improve prose? Again, these are things that seem obvious on the surface, but when you start actually looking at it and questioning it, you're like, oh, well, what does it actually mean? And you kind of need to define these terms before you decide on any answers. Another way you could take this question is to compare the use of punctuation across different languages. So languages aren't my forte, they're not something I have a specialism in, so I couldn't give you any like absolute answers here, but it might be interesting to discuss how punctuation is used between different languages, for example, especially languages that are incredibly different. So for example, you could take like Mandarin and French and compare the different uses of punctuation in those and you know, what effects it has on languages that are so completely different. Or you could take a more ancient language and something that is more up to date and compare, for example, you know, standard English today with Latin and talk about the different uses or lack of punctuation in either of those. That could be a really, really interesting thing to talk about and cover if you're knowledgeable in those areas, which I am not. Another really interesting discussion point around this could be to talk about our use of punctuation and how it's changed kind of colloquially, I guess you could say, over time, sort of unofficially, how, what's the word I'm looking for? Sort of like colloquially, but not. I'm going to try and explain what I mean. Tell me what word I mean, because I cannot think of it. But like, look at, for example, internet culture and sort of online culture and just kind of how we interact with technology and stuff altogether. For a long time, you know, thanks to things like having number pads on our phones, or we had character limits on text messages and, you know, early Twitter character limits and everything like that. For a long time we shortened words, we missed out letters, and we stopped using punctuation altogether, and yet still managed to convey our meaning as much as we possibly could. We were incredibly limited, but we still managed to express ourselves as succinctly as possible. And then over time we began to kind of go back to using more traditional punctuation online, but then we also started using it in new ways and seeing people use punctuation to express different things. Look at the kind of mid-2010s Tumblr and how people were using punctuation in different ways to express different things and kind of have these little in-jokes and memes, and, you know, they kind of almost created their own language and culture using punctuation in completely new ways. Another example would be look at our use of tone indicators online today. Not everyone uses it, but a good bundle of people do, and I for one find it very, very useful. I just in general, I think I prefer texting to things like phone calls because I'm very easily able to convey my meaning in ways that I sometimes find hard to do with my own tone of voice. So if I'm just joking about something, I can't always convey that with my voice or my face properly, but I can put a little sticky out tongue face on the end of a text, or a little like tone indicator to say that I'm being sarcastic or joking, and my meaning is completely clear and in front of me. So in that sense, we've created a sort of like new use for punctuation in a non-traditional way, but it's improved how I'm able to express myself, and therefore we could argue that punctuation has improved prose. That's just one example. This question isn't necessarily just asking, does punctuation improve prose? It's not necessarily looking for a yes or no. It's asking you to consider how we use punctuation, what punctuation is, how it's changed over time, how it changes between cultures and languages and places, and I think I mentioned time already, and also how it kind of connects people and helps us express ourselves and interact with each other and understand each other, and how sometimes use of certain punctuation can even kind of arise within subcultures and help kind of foster those subcultures even further. Does that make sense? There's a lot you can talk about there, it's fascinating stuff. Anyway, next question. Alright, you know what, it's late, I'm gonna get a glass of wine to finish this video, because why not? It's been a long couple of days. I was at work until like 1:30 AM last night. It's gonna be another long night tonight. So, if I can have a nice single glass of wine while I'm doing this, it's enjoyable, you know? Okay, so on to a completely different kind of topic here, and I thought this one was interesting. We have some questions like this, which says, has single-sex education had its day? To which my immediate response was like, yeah, of course it has. And then I started to think about the video I made a while back about the importance of like mixing genders and sex when talking about sex education, and I started listing kind of pros of mixed education in my head over things like socialization and learning from others and thinking about not discriminating. And I also started thinking about the link between same-sex education and private schools and private education, and how I personally am not really a fan of that, and I think there's a lot of problems around it, especially around like elitism and classism and stuff like that. So in my mind I was like, yeah, same-sex education sucks. How can I ever think of a counter-argument to this? And then I was like, actually, and this is what I love about these questions, they kind of push you outside your comfort zone. And even when you think there's an obvious answer to something, or you think you've already made up your mind, you can find a way to change your own mind a little bit and challenge yourself and push yourself, and this is why I find it so inspiring. So, I realised that after, last year was a bad year for me. You guys know some of this, and I had some issues and there were some incidents, and I haven't spoken about everything publicly, but basically like everything built up over a long period of time, and I found myself like terrified to be alone with men, and I stopped feeling safe having a male driving instructor. So I still want to learn how to drive, and it's still absolutely my right to an education and to be able to take lessons and to feel safe while I do so. So about 2 months ago, I started looking for a female driving instructor, and I found this amazing woman called Salma. She's very, very nice. She has been a wonderful instructor so far, and we're doing a mock test tomorrow. I'm very nervous. Anyway, so my instructor at the minute is someone who is a woman who only teaches other women how to drive, and I realised that that is essentially a type of same-sex education, and a very, very important one. I was scared to be alone and in a vulnerable position with a man, but why should that stop me from being able to learn how to drive? Why should that stop me from getting an education? And I think that's the case not only in terms of driving lessons, but in all sort of forms of education. There are many people who will have had trauma and difficulties and struggles, and in some cases for them, same-sex education is the only way they will feel safe in a classroom and be able to get the education that they deserve and need. Thinking about it now, I fully believe that same-sex education can be freeing and offer opportunities for people that they wouldn't have otherwise. For survivors of assault or abuse, they may only want to learn from people the same sex as them or the same gender as them. And I think people should be allowed to choose that if they feel they need it. Or let's imagine, for example, you're a young woman from a fundamentalist religious background, whether that's something in Islam or Christianity or anything else. It doesn't matter what it is, but the point is there are many fundamentalist religious societies that don't allow women, for example, to be alone with men, to mix with men, but sometimes those women still want to be able to get out of the house. They still want to get an education. They still need an education. And ideally, we'd say, in an ideal world, let them learn what they want, where they want, with whoever they want. But that's not always possible. And so for some people, they need to play the systems and grab the freedom and opportunities they can wherever they can. So if it's a choice between no education at all or only same-sex education, then I think same-sex education is a good thing. Does that make sense? However, again, the other side of the argument, because again, keep flipping backwards and forwards, keep challenging yourself. The other side of the argument is that we have to be mindful not to be exclusionary at all. Offering a safe space for people is very important, but we shouldn't be excluding other people in the process. So for example, can we ever have education that is split by sex, that is still mindful and respectful and inclusive of all trans and non-binary people? And if so, how do we achieve that? Because that's very, very important. And of course, as you're making all these arguments, it would be good to look at different studies and get facts and statistics and evidence to actually back up the different viewpoints and everything like that if you're writing this as an academic essay. But for now, I think in this video, it's interesting to just kind of raise these questions and, provoke some thoughts. Oh, I found this quite funny. There's actually plenty of questions on here that are kind of relating to videos that I've already made over the years. So this question here about why are conspiracy theories so enduring? That's an interesting one, which I covered quite a bit in my old video about flat earthers and why are people flat earthers, in terms of why doesn't people who would otherwise be intelligent and smart and, thoughtful, why do they still believe in conspiracy theories? Covered that in a video already, 4 years ago. Oh, also this one here, why teach poetry to children? Very interesting question, very important one. I covered this a little bit in my intro to poetry video, and I also kind of covered it in my one on children's poetry, which is called something like, just because it's for kids doesn't mean it should be bad or something like that. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I'll link them in the video description as well. So yeah, I've kind of covered a few of these already, which is interesting. The last one I want to cover is, God, again, this is one that I could speak about for hours, but I don't have time in this video, so I'll just raise a few of the basic points and then pass it over to you guys to discuss. Is all bodily mutilation an unjustifiable assault unless performed on consenting adults? That is a broad, fascinating topic that looks at bodily autonomy and sentience and right to life and all kinds of topics. It's an important one, it's fascinating, and I don't have all the answers. So for starters, the question just asks about consenting adults. It doesn't name any particular species, so who are we talking about? Are we talking about Homo sapiens? Or are we talking about all animals or all living things? What species are we talking about here? We can have one discussion for humans, but what about bodily mutilation on animals? What about killing for food? What about hunting for sport? What about killing non-sentient species, like killing bugs or parasites? And it doesn't even just have to be killing, does it? What about branding cattle? What about euthanizing an ill animal to prevent any more suffering? What about people who dock their dogs' ears or tails or dye their fur? And can a non-human animal ever consent anyway? Where and how do we define the lines of what is okay and what isn't? And if, for example, we did only want to focus on humans, of course it's easy to say, well, only do stuff to a consenting adult. But again, what counts as bodily mutilation and what counts as consent? How do we define these terms? So first, let's consider, can a child consent? What about when kids are circumcised as babies without any knowledge or understanding of what's happening to them? How is that legal and justified? How is that not bodily mutilation? How is that not unjustifiable assault? The same goes for female genital mutilation. Is all of that somehow better or worse than parents who get their young children's ears pierced or their hair dyed without their kids really knowing what's happening? What about children or babies who need medical treatment and, maybe that requires surgery or something like that, but they're unable to understand or give consent themselves? Like, is getting a baby's ears pierced unjustifiable assault? Is performing surgery on a baby unjustifiable assault? I think many people would have different answers for those, and I think the important question to ask is why? Why do we have those boundaries? Why do we argue that some things are and some things aren't? Why do some people think it's okay to pierce a baby's ears and other people think it's the most vile thing? Same with adults. What if an adult needs life-saving surgery, but they're unconscious and can't consent themselves? Is it still unjustifiable assault to perform invasive surgery on someone, as that is essentially bodily mutilation, when they can't consent to it? Even if you can argue it's for their own good. Let's take a less serious example like tattoos and talk about all the different, situations where that is or isn't unjustifiable assault, because arguably tattooing is bodily mutilation. You're changing your body. I think that's fair. We might say that it's okay when an adult chooses to get a tattoo on themselves because they're consenting to it, but it's not okay to force another person to get a tattoo when they don't want it. One example where it's wrong to tattoo another person, for example, could be during the Holocaust, where prisoners in concentration camps were forced to get tattoos with their prisoner number on their arm. Clearly bodily mutilation, clearly dehumanizing, clearly harmful. I think it would be fair to call that unjustifiable assault. Obviously bad for a whole host of reasons. Another example, it would probably be frowned upon in general for a parent to tattoo their child. That sounds horrible. However, many parents of identical twins say that they'll get a small, dot or dash tattooed on one of their babies so they can tell them apart. That's technically bodily mutilation of a non-consenting non-adult, but is that somehow justifiable? Is there a difference between unjustifiable and justifiable assault? I think this is just one example that proves that it's not the act of tattooing which is bad, but the context in which it's done. And therefore it's not the act of bodily mutilation that's bad, but the context in which it's done. Another huge example would be pregnancy, both wanted and unwanted. I think we can all agree that abortion could be classed as bodily mutilation for the sake of this argument. However, I'd also argue that pregnancy itself is bodily mutilation to some extent because of how much damage it does to the body. If a person was forced to have an abortion against their will, I would argue that is unjustifiable assault. However, I also believe that forcing a person who doesn't want to be pregnant to continue with their pregnancy is also bodily mutilation and also unjustifiable assault. By choosing to remain pregnant themselves, an individual is consenting to whatever bodily mutilation that pregnancy is going to do to them, but a person who is forced to remain pregnant against their will is not, in my view. That matter is complicated further, however, because different people attribute different levels of autonomy to the fetus as well. When, if ever, does the fetus's right to grow and live overpower and overshadow and become more important than the person's right to not have their body mutilated by another living thing without their permission? So for me personally, I draw the line at when the fetus develops sentience and consciousness. And I discussed this in a hell of a lot more detail and looked at the science and the biology behind it and the actual growth and development of the fetus in a lot more detail, and the science all backed up my ideas in a video collaboration that I did with Holy Koolaid about 2 years ago now. However, some people will thoroughly disagree with my conclusions and place it as sooner or later than I do. But that's okay, it's something for us to discuss and debate, isn't it? But again, this all raises more questions, doesn't it? So if a person believes that a fetus has a right to life more than the host has a right to bodily autonomy from the moment that fetus is conceived, for example, then are they also okay with other people using a person's body without their consent for other things? For example, if someone needs a kidney transplant, should a person with 2 healthy kidneys be forced to give one up just to save the life of another? What about a parent? Should a parent be forced to give up parts of their healthy organs to save their child if they need a transplant, for example? If not, then why is a mother forced to give up parts of her body for pregnancy, but not after the baby's born? take it further, and if it's okay to choose to amputate a limb in order to save or improve a quality of life, then why is it not okay to remove a clump of non-sentient cells from your uterus to save or improve your own quality of life? If it's okay to remove non-conscious cancer cells, why is it not okay to remove non-conscious fetal cells? If your only argument there is that the fetal cells have the potential to grow into something sentient, then why is it okay for a man to flush several thousand sperm cells down the toilet, but not okay to remove a handful of sperm and egg cells from a uterus? I mean, you know what I'm trying to say. That's not technically the term, but you know. Like say a blastocyst. Let's say, why is it not okay to remove a blastocyst, for example, from a uterus in some people's eyes? And then to bring the conversation back to the whole thing about differing standards for different species, why do non-conscious human fetuses often have more rights, especially by law, than many conscious sentient animals? If it's okay to take antibiotics to kill thousands of bacterial cells, then why is it not okay to remove a handful of equally non-conscious human cells from your womb? If it's okay to kill thousands of conscious sentient cows, why is it not okay to remove a handful of non-conscious, still developing human cells from the body? And if your response is simply, it's different because it's human, then why is it different? Why do you place more value, or why do you treat humans as different than other species? How do you justify that? And before this gets too controversial and becomes just like a pure abortion debate, let's move away from fetuses and back to human adults again. So, for example, when does a person's control over their own body end? When do you lose bodily autonomy, if ever? Is it when you're no longer lucid or conscious enough or able to understand what's happening to you? Is it at death, or is it never? So for example, let's take a whole bunch of people who need life-saving surgery. You have a child who is unable to consent for themselves, but the parents give consent. You have an adult who is able to consent for themselves, that's cool. You have an unconscious adult who cannot consent for themselves because they're unconscious, and you have a patient with dementia who doesn't have a full understanding of what's going on and is unable to consent. If you perform the same surgery on all these people, is it more or less ethical if they can or can't consent themselves? Let's take another example and look at someone who's already died. Let's say someone didn't sign up to be an organ donor, they die and their organs are healthy enough to be used to save 7 people, for example. Is it moral to harvest their organs anyway? Technically, it's for the greater good. More people will benefit. The dead person won't even know what's happening to them. But when they were alive, they did not consent to this. Therefore, is it fair to use their body in this way when they didn't want it? And again, going back to the pregnancy thing, why does then a dead body have more rights about what happens to it than many living women today? If you harvest organs from a body that didn't consent to them being harvested, is that unjustifiable assault? If you dispose of a body in a way that they didn't want when they were alive, is that unjustifiable assault? So for example, if someone said, please donate my body to science, and instead you cremate it, is that unjustifiable assault? Is that bodily mutilation that is unjustifiable? I wish I had answers to all these questions. Like it would be nice, wouldn't it? But I absolutely don't. There's so many questions and scenarios, and this is such a complex topic that I absolutely do not have all the answers to, but which I would love to hear your thoughts on. If you kind of do want to hear more detail about my ideas of sentience and consciousness and, you know, the rights of a fetus over a person carrying it and stuff, then please go check out the collab I did with Holy Koolaid, because we go into like a lot of the science there, and I back up my reasons by like looking at the actual development of the fetus and all that stuff, and it's quite interesting. So that's something that I have personal answers for, but that's not to say everyone will have the same standards and stuff as me, and that's okay. Just as long as you're not arguing to take the rights away from anyone else based on just a difference of opinion, you know? The point is, I've been talking for a really, really long time, and I've been very excited throughout this video, and I have so many thoughts and ideas, and I think I need to go rest my brain for a little bit. But this is where I'm going to end the video. There's a hell of a lot more I'd love to discuss in terms of these questions I've talked about here, and also the other ones that we didn't even start to cover. Like, look at all of these. Look at them all. I could talk about all of these, any of these. Okay, maybe not all of them, but there's so much potential here, and I find it so inspiring and fascinating. And if you'd like to pause the video and have a look at any of these questions and request that I talk about any in more detail in a video, or you just want to see another video like this where I just kind of discuss them very briefly, then please let me know down in the comments. I can't promise that I'll cover absolutely every question that you request, because some of them just I don't have enough expertise in. Some of them just aren't things that I'm interested in. For example, economics isn't something I really care all that much about, so I wouldn't want to do a whole video on one of the economics questions probably. But I'll see what I can do based on your suggestions and requests. And yeah, this is where I'm done today. Thank you once again to Atlas VPN for sponsoring this video and making videos like this possible. Thank you to you guys for continuing to support my channel. I appreciate it so much. If you like this video, leave a like. If you're new here, please subscribe. That would be awesome. If you've been here a while, check that you haven't been unsubscribed, please, because, you know, sometimes it happens. And if you want to leave a comment, let me know if you took an exam like this, what questions would you choose to answer? Or would you just walk straight out of the exam room? Okay, that's me done today. Thank you for watching. I appreciate you so much, and I'll see you again really, really soon. Good night.